Otumfo Osetutu Abebio the Asantehene delivers royal lecture at Howard University, Washington, D.C. in America. Let's go and watch Otumfo. Otumfo Osetutu Asantemaira and so ekopiem ewo America, Howard University, and as a Howard School Pomu na ode ensembi atudwa ewo Washington, D.C. ewo America. Yenko na yenkotie Otumfo Osetutu Abebio we eye Ashanti TV ene wofa TV ne yakabom ena ye de menhia kasebo enso so ede ebro yesrew yenko na yenkuti otumfo nsem a wode atudwa Howard University ede afa Africa empo yenkasa ye kano sese ye ma ye ni ekọ yenkasa ho na no ene yen identity yenko na yenkuti otumfo Osetutu Abebio
On behalf of my dear wife and children, and on behalf of the chiefs and people of Asantehene, I bring you warm greetings. I'm deeply honored to stand before you at Howard University today, an institution whose history occupies a distinguished place in the intellectual, political, and social advancement of people of African descent. I express my sincere appreciation to the Executive Board of the Millennium Excellence Foundation and to the leadership of Howard University for extending this invitation to me and for creating this opportunity for us to reflect together upon matters that concern not merely Ghana or Africa, but the wider historical family of African peoples across the world. Howard University is more than an institution at which knowledge is transmitted and academic degrees are awarded. is an institution of memory, intellectual courage, social responsibility, and service. Since its establishment, it has helped generations of men and women of African descent to demonstrate that education is not simply a pathway towards individual advancement, but also a responsibility towards society.
Sure.
Its commitment to truth and service makes this university an especially appropriate place to consider the relationship among governance, cultural preservation, traditional leadership, and the reconstruction of meaningful bonds between Africa and its diaspora.
Sure.
The theme placed before us is profound because it brings together three subjects that are too often considered separately. Governance concerns the organization of power and responsibility. Culture concerns the meaning a people give to their existence. And the diaspora concerns the survival of identity across geography, displacement, and historical rupture. Yet beneath all these three lies one fundamental question. How does a people organize itself, understand itself, and transmit to future generations an inheritance worthy of preservation?
Sure.
My proposition this evening is that traditional leadership, when exercised with integrity, wisdom, accountability, and respect for constitutional government, remains an important part of the answer to that question.
Sure.
Traditional leadership should not be understood merely as an institution inherited from the past, nor should culture be reduced to ceremonial display. Properly understood, both are living resources that can contribute to good governance, social cohesion, peace building, education, development, cultural confidence, and the renewal of relationship between Africa and the peoples of African descent throughout the world. Governance is frequently confused with government. Yet while government refers to the formal institutions of the state, the executive, the legislature, the judiciary, ministries, public agencies, and the administrative machinery through which public policy is implemented, governance is wider. It concerns the manner in which authority is acquired, exercised, limited, and transferred, how resources are managed, how disputes are resolved, how leaders are held accountable, how the vulnerable are protected, and how society defines and pursues the common good.
Sure.
A nation may possess an impressive constitution and yet experience poor governance. It may hold regular elections and still fail to provide justice, security, education, healthcare, or meaningful participation for substantial sections of its population.
Sure.
Institutions do not operate in a moral vacuum. They operate within cultures, habits, expectations, and systems of social obligation. Law is indispensable, but law alone cannot create a good society. A constitution may determine what a public official is permitted to do, but culture helps determine what society believes a responsible leader ought to do.
Sure.
A court may punish corruption after the offense has occurred. Still, society must also cultivate the moral conviction that public resources are held in trust and must not be treated as private property.
Sure.
A judicial decision may determine the legal rights of parties to a dispute, but judgment alone does not always restore damaged relationships within families and communities. Governance, therefore, requires more than institutional machinery.
Sure.
It requires legitimacy, trust, moral restraint, memory, and shared expectations, as well as citizens and leaders who understand that rights are inseparable from obligations and that power is inseparable from responsibilities.
Sure.
Traditional African political systems understood this relationship between authority and moral obligation in ways that deserve serious academic attention. Leadership was rarely conceived merely as the possession of unrestricted power. The ruler was expected to protect the community, administer justice, preserve the land, defend the vulnerable, and maintain the people's inheritance.
Sure.
Authority was therefore accompanied by responsibility, and that principle remains relevant to our modern world. Power, separated from responsibility, becomes dangerous. Authority, separated from accountability, eventually loses legitimacy. And leadership that seeks privilege without accepting obligations weakens the institution from which that privilege derives.
Sure.
Permit me in this respect to draw upon the Asante constitutional tradition. The Asante political system is sometimes misunderstood by those who encounter only its visible manifestations: the golden stool, the royal umbrellas, the drums, the gold ornaments, the linquets as they stand here, the swords, the procession, and the great ceremonies of state. These symbols are important because they are the visible language through which memory and authority are communicated.
Sure.
But beneath the splendor lies a sophisticated philosophy of political responsibility.
Sure.
The golden stool is not the private property of the Asantehene. It represents the unity, identity, historical continuity, and collective spirit of Asanteman. The Asantehene is therefore not the owner of the nation, but its custodian, and that distinction is fundamental. The occupant of the golden stool receives an inheritance that existed before him, and which must endure after him. He holds authority temporarily, but he holds the people's heritage in trust. The land, institutions, memories, and moral obligations associated with the stool cannot legitimately be reduced to the personal interest of the individual who occupies it.
Sure.
Because from this perspective, leadership is a form of trusteeship. The idea of trusteeship contains an important lesson for all systems of governance. We hold office temporarily. We inherit institutions from those who came before us. And although we exercise authority in the present, our decisions affect people who are not yet born. The leader who consumes everything for the advantage of the present generation has misunderstood the nature of stewardship. This principle has particular agency in an age of environmental degradation, uncontrolled exploitation of natural resources, and political decision-making dominated by short-term considerations. We did not create the rivers, forests, land, and ecological systems that sustain us. We inherited them. And whatever our authority may be today, we have no moral right to destroy the inheritance of generations unborn.
Sure.
Traditional governments also reminds us that legitimate authority requires consultation. Our people say, "Tikron kwejina," meaning that one head does not constitute a council. And we also say, "Nyansen ni onipa baako chirim," meaning that wisdom does not reside in the head of one person alone.
Sure.
These are not merely attractive proverbs. They communicate a political philosophy. Asantehene exercises authority through an established order of chiefs, queen mothers, elders, linguists, and recognized customary officers. Matters are considered, evidence may be heard, historical precedent may be recalled. Different perspectives may be presented, and decisions are shaped by consultation and concern for communal harmony.
Sure.
Consultation does not mean that leadership has no authority, nor does listening diminish the dignity of the leader. The leader who refuses to hear contrary opinion eventually becomes imprisoned by those who tell him only what he wishes to hear.
Sure.
Responsible leadership must therefore create room for difficult truth. The modern world sometimes equates decisiveness with refusing consultation, but our ancestors understood differently. They knew that the strength of a decision may depend upon the quality of deliberation that precedes it. This does not mean that traditional institutions should be romanticized, because no institution, traditional, political, religious, or academic, is beyond criticism or reform. And antiquity alone does not confer moral perfection. Traditional authority must justify its continuing relevance through service. A chief who is concerned only with ceremony, privileges, titles, and public honor gradually diminishes the institution he represents. At the same time, a traditional ruler who listens to his people, protects community resources, promotes education, mediates conflict, assists the vulnerable, and responds to contemporary challenges, strengthens both tradition and society.
Sure.
Traditional leadership in the 21st century cannot therefore be limited to festivals and ceremonial occasions. It must be capable of responding to educational inequality, unemployment, environmental degradation, land disputes, public health emergencies, community conflict, and the anxieties of young people. The palace must remain a guardian of memory, but it must also become a workshop for the future.
Sure.
This requires traditional institutions themselves to accept reform, because tradition must never become a shield behind which injustice, corruption, exploitation, or arbitrary authority are protected. The dignity of women and children must be defended. Young people must be heard. Persons with disabilities must not be marginalized. Community resources must be managed responsibly. Land administration must be transparent. And succession and customary processes must be conducted with integrity.
Sure.
The proper defense of tradition is therefore not an insistence that nothing should ever change, but the capacity to distinguish between enduring principles of an institution and those practices that require reconciliation.
Sure.
A tree survives because its roots hold firmly to the soil, but it also survives because its branches respond to the wind and reach towards the light, and so must our institutions.
Sure.
This brings me to culture. Culture is frequently treated as entertainment, appearing at festivals, tourism events, diplomatic ceremonies, and national celebrations, while being too often absent from serious conversations about development,
Sure.
governance, and the future of society. This is a mistake, because culture is not merely music, dance, clothing, food, and ceremony, important though these are. Culture includes language, morality, historical memory, family organization, spirituality, political philosophy, customary law, artistic knowledge, methods of conflict resolution, environmental understanding, and ideas about what constitutes a good human life. Culture tells the people who they are and provides the intellectual and moral vocabulary through which people understand birth and death, childhood and adulthood, marriage and family, authority and responsibility, suffering and hope.
Sure.
A society that loses confidence in its culture eventually loses confidence in itself. But cultural preservation does not require us to free society at some imagined moment in the past. Culture is not a dead object to be placed behind glass. It is a living inheritance that must be understood, practiced, questioned, renewed, and transmitted. Modernity must not be confused with imitation. Africa should learn from the achievements of other civilizations and adopt useful technologies, scientific discoveries, sound administrative systems, and institutions that improve human life. But participation in the modern world should not require us to abandon our own languages, intellectual traditions, and historical consciousness. Progress should never require a people to despise themselves. This is why the preservation of African languages deserves urgent attention. Language is more than vocabulary. It carries history, humor, philosophy, moral reasoning, and the categories through which a people interprets reality. In our proverbs, appellations, songs, court language, and oral traditions, some ideas cannot always be fully translated into another language. When a language disappears, humanity does not merely lose a method of communication, humanity loses a distinctive way of understanding the world. We must therefore ask ourselves difficult questions about how many African children can speak the languages of their grandparents fluently. How many, and I must confess, my children have been taught how to speak and now they are speaking Twi regularly. When they were young, they thought they were American and British, but now they know that they are Ghanaians. And then how many understand the histories of their towns and villages and families? How many know the meanings carried by the symbols of their communities? And how many can interpret the proverb that once educated generations in ethics, responsibility, and social conduct? We cannot leave the answers to chance. Cultural preservation must become part of serious educational policy. Universities, traditional authorities, museums, families, churches, community institutions, and governments must work together to document endangered knowledge, record oral histories, preserve archives, and train younger generations to interpret their heritage. Technology must become an ally of cultural preservation. Our generation has tools that those before us could scarcely imagine, allowing voices that once existed only in human memory to be preserved, manuscripts to be digitized, historical photographs to be restored and archived, oral histories to be recorded, and endangered languages to be documented and taught across continents. Preservation must, however, remain ethical, because not every sacred object, ritual, or body or traditional knowledge is intended for unrestricted circulation. Cultural knowledge has custodians, contexts, and responsibilities, and digitization should preserve heritage without stripping it of dignity and meaning. It is within this discussion of history and identity that we must confront the experience of the global African diaspora. Diaspora emerged through several historical processes. Some Africans left the continent voluntarily in pursuit of education, commerce, employment, and opportunity. In contrast, millions of others were forcibly removed through systems of enslavement that inflicted immeasurable suffering upon Africa and its descendants. The transatlantic slave trade separated families, disrupted societies, and transported generations of African men, women, and children into systems that sought not only their labor but their humanity. The consequences of that history did not disappear with the abolition of slavery. They remain visible in questions of race, inequality, economic exclusion, cultural displacement, and the continuing struggle for equal citizenship and dignity. Yet the history of the African diaspora cannot be written only as a history of victimhood, because it is also a history of diaspora cannot be written only as a history of victimhood, because it is also a history of survival, resistance, intellectual achievement, political courage, scientific innovation, and cultural creativity. Those who crossed the Atlantic under conditions of extreme violence carried more than their bodies. They carried memory, spirituality, rhythm, agricultural knowledge, artistic traditions, and ideas about family and community. Under conditions designed to raise them, they recreated themselves. And across Americas, the Caribbean, Europe, and elsewhere, African-descended communities transformed societies that had often denied them equality. The diaspora gave the world physicians, scientists, judges, political leaders, intellectuals, artists, educators, freedom fighters, entrepreneurs, and builders of institutions. It participated in movements against slavery, colonialism, segregation, apartheid, and racial injustice, supported struggles for African independence, and helped turn the liberation of Africa into global cause. Africa and its diaspora, therefore, owe one another a depth of recognition, and the relationship cannot be understood as one in which Africa provides ancestral identity while the diaspora provides financial resources.
Sure.
That would be an impoverished interpretation. That would be an impoverished interpretation of a profound historical relationship. We are participants in one long historical conversation. Ghana has played an important role in efforts to rebuild these relationships, and initiatives such as the Year of Return and Beyond the Return have encouraged people of African descent to visit Ghana and reconnect with the continent.
Sure.
These initiatives have been valuable, but the relationship must now move beyond ceremonial homecoming.
Sure.
A photograph at a historic site does not by itself create belonging. An African name does not by itself create belonging. And attendance at a festival does not by itself create belonging. Belonging is created through relationship, understanding, responsibility, and sustained participation.
Sure.
The Akan concept of Sankofa invites us to return and retrieve what is valuable from the past.
Sure.
But Sankofa does not ask us to remain permanently facing backwards. We recover memory to move into the future with greater wisdom. And the next phase of African diaspora relations must therefore move from symbolic return towards substantive partnership.
Sure.
Diaspora communities should not be regarded simply as sources of remittances, tourism, investment, or expertise, because they are part of the wider African historical family. Many seek not only commercial opportunity, but dignity, understanding, relationships, and meaningful participation.
Sure.
At the same time, reconnection must be approached with humility on all sides, because Africa is not culturally uniform. Ghana is not a single historical community, and the continent contains many peoples, languages, political traditions, and experiences.
Sure.
Identities formed in the Americas, the Caribbean, and Europe under slavery, segregation, and racial discrimination developed within circumstances different from those in which ethnic, linguistic, and national identities developed within Africa.
Sure.
We must therefore listen to one another. Continental Africans must listen seriously to the experiences of racial injustice, cultural displacement, and historical dispossession carried by the diaspora communities. At the same time, members of the diaspora must also listen to Africa's experiences of colonialism, political struggle, poverty, state building, conflict, and development. Neither side should claim exclusive ownership of African identity. We must meet as relatives separated by history, now with the opportunity to construct a shared future.
Sure.
Traditional media. Traditional leadership can contribute significantly to this process because traditional institutions carry historical continuity in ways that governments cannot always provide. Governments can create diplomatic frameworks, immigration systems, investment policies, and legal structures, while traditional institutions can provide cultural interpretation, community entry, historical context, and a sense of belonging. The responsibility must, however, be exercised with integrity.
Sure.
The reconnection of the African family must never become a marketplace in which belonging is sold.
Sure.
Traditional titles must not become commercial rewards. Historical claims must not be invented to satisfy emotional expectations.
Sure.
And sacred institutions should not be trivialized for tourism or spectacle.